Good morning, everyone. It is 9:30. We will be getting started shortly. My name is Ranjana Maharaj, and I'm the Elder Justice Specialist with the Division of Policy, Equity, and Research. And I'd like to welcome everyone to the IIIB Legal Services, Elder Justice, and the Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman webinar series. This is the final part of the three-part webinar series, and today's topic will be focused on the Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman. Just a few logistics reminders to help us get started. To enable closed captioning, please click on the CC icon on your toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Participants are muted during the presentation. Please use the raise hand icon during the Q&A portion to request to be unmuted. You can also submit your questions and comments using the Q&A icon on the Zoom toolbar. And please note that this webinar is being recorded. The presentation materials and recording will be available at the end, posted to the CDA's YouTube channel and to view and access. And we will email the presentation to everyone that has registered today. And we will have a 5-minute break with the interactive portion for participants, and we are saving time for the Q&A towards the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. Today's agenda is displayed, and it's a full agenda, and we'll go over it briefly. We will have opening remarks with Blanca Castro, and we have Rachel Tate, the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Coordinator for LA County and San Bernardino County. We have Tim Wellman, the Chief Assistant City Prosecutor for the City of Pasadena, to provide an overview on PEDAL and FAST models. We will have a 5-minute break, following a Let's Take a Poll interactive session, followed by Q&A and closing remarks. Just to provide an overview for the first 2 webinar series, the first webinar, part 1 in our series, was dedicated to enhancing IIIB legal services. We discussed the importance of legal services for older adults and adults with disabilities, outlining key focus areas for improvement. We featured the senior legal aid assistance team who highlighted and shared their best practices and success stories for their respective service areas. Part 2 delved into the critical topic of elder justice and how to integrate elder justice within our programs. We explored identifying and addressing elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. The webinar emphasized the importance of a multidisciplinary approach, highlighting collaboration with adult protective services, law enforcement, and community organizations. We had the Legal Services of Northern California, BETZDEC, and the California Elder Justice Coalition highlighted in the webinar, providing their insights, modeled approach, and success stories. And with that, we are now at our part 3 series. And at this time, I would like to welcome the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman, Blanca Castro.
Thank you, Ranjana. And good morning, everyone. My name again is Blanca Castro. I have the privilege and honor of being the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman. I also will be joined today by Rachel Tate, who is the Vice President of Ombudsman Services with Wise and Healthy Aging in Los Angeles. That's the local long-term care ombudsman in the County of Los Angeles. And then we also will be joined by Tim Wellman, who's the Chief Assistant City Prosecutor for the City of Pasadena. We'll share a little bit more about what they're going to cover. Next slide. We've been around for almost 50 years now, the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, and I want to just share an important quote, a brief quote by the commissioner or the gentleman who really came up with the idea of creating a long-term care ombudsman program specifically focused on serving residents in long-term care facilities. So think about this back in 1975 when Nixon was president. Commissioner Arthur Fleming, who is the founder of the Ombudsman program, stated that our nation has been conducting investigations, passing new laws, and issuing new regulations relative to nursing homes at a rapid rate during the past few years. All of this activity will be of little avail unless our communities are organized in such a manner that new laws and new regulations are utilized to deal with the individual complaints of older persons who are living in nursing homes. The individual in the nursing home is powerless. If the laws and regulations are not being applied to them, they might as well not have been passed or issued. We are the only program that serves 100% entirely people who live in long-term care facilities. And while I hear oftentimes that they're referred to as institutions, skilled nursing facilities, residential care facilities for the elderly, also known as assisted living, are part of your community. The mission of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman is to seek resolution of problems and advocate for the rights of residents of long-term care facilities with the goal of ensuring their dignity, their quality of life, and quality of care. In California, there are 35 long-term care ombudsman programs and approximately 600 or under volunteers and staff who are certified to conduct the investigations and do routine visits. Next slide. We're resident-centered. What that means is any investigation that comes to our attention, we need to get the permission of the resident to A, open an investigation, and B, share any of their information when we cross-report to licensing or to law enforcement. We are also responsible for educating the residents, families, and their facility staff, and the public on resident rights. And we will highlight what those resident rights are and facility regulations. We also are required to conduct regular unannounced visits to skilled nursing facilities and the intermediate care facilities and RCFEs. Next slide. When we do receive an investigation about a suspected elder or dependent adult abuse in a long-term care setting, as I stated that we are resident-centered, we're also trauma-informed. We provide focus on trauma-informed and person-centered approach. So what that means is really making sure that whatever we're doing, it's what the resident wants, not what we think is best for the resident, but what the person wants. We are also responsible for witnessing advanced healthcare directives and property transfers in skilled nursing facilities that are $100 or more. And the last item, which is really important, we are also appointed by bankruptcy courts, U.S. trustees, to be a patient care advocate when there is a long-term care facility that is filed for bankruptcy, and we monitor that facility to ensure that the quality of care does not decline. Oftentimes, when there is a bankruptcy, you will see administrators, staff, and people who are well-trained and know the residents quickly moving out and finding other jobs. So it's very important that we are diligent, that we have this role, and we take it very seriously. We work with our Office of Legal Services during bankruptcy proceedings, and currently we have 2 bankruptcy cases that we are monitoring the resident care and the quality of care. Next slide. I've talked about resident rights, and I just want to make sure that we all understand that just because you are, whether you're in short-term or long-term care, that we do not lose our rights. If nothing else, we need to protect those rights. And so the first one is to be treated with dignity and respect. That means when somebody wants to be referred to, or if it's a transgender woman or transgender man, or somebody is in transition, they want to be referred to as how they identify. That is treating somebody with dignity and respect. If individuals who want to share the same room and they are LGBTQ. They want to share the same room with their spouse or their partner. That is treating someone with dignity and respect. When somebody voices a grievance, they should be protected from retaliation. And I mean retaliation, bullying, or anything that may make them fear that they cannot reach out to the ombudsman and seek our support or our guidance if they are not being, if any of their rights are being violated. Residents have the right in California to be free from chemical and physical restraints. And when I say chemical, what we are referring to are the psychotropic medications. Oftentimes we receive complaints where an individual is completely unresponsive. They're not able to communicate because they have been so heavily drugged. And it could be because of certain behaviors. They might have dementia related behaviors. They might have traumatic brain injury behaviors. But these are, everybody has the right to be informed about what kind of medication they're being given, what the possible side effects are, and has the right to say yes or no. And of course, physical restraints, absolutely not allowed. Next slide. Everyone has a right to communicate privately, whether by phone, and that means if you want to close your door, you want to go into another room, and you want to contact the ombudsman, for example, you have the right to do that privately and without any fear of anyone hearing your conversation. All individuals have the right to ensure that they can tell who can access their confidential medical records and who cannot. Next slide. And lastly, but most importantly, all residents have the right. Excuse me, sorry about that. In California, all people are given the right to have advance notice if they're going to be transferred or if there's a plan to discharge them. That means you should be given 30-day notice. There should be a care plan. You should be participating in that care plan. If that individual, if the resident is unable to communicate, then their representative should be part of that care plan. And they should be given options on how that transfer and where that transfer will take place, whether it's back home, whether it's another facility, but that there is also the right to appeal or say no if you don't want to be transferred. You have a right to receive and send mail, personal mail. And when we say receive it, and why this is important is because nobody should be opening up your mail except yourself. And then finally, apply for state or federal assistance without any discrimination. And that means without any discrimination for source of income or any other of the criteria of discrimination categories that may be used. Next step, next slide, excuse me. I apologize, two more. This one is really important. And I mentioned it about the constraint, the chemical restraints. All residents have the right to be fully informed about the services and what's available, but also how much they're being charged. And especially with residential care facilities for the elderly, what we are seeing is that providers oftentimes might increase rates because they have to pay more for staff, pay more for services, for supplies. But there is no increase or improvement in the level of care that the individual is receiving. So providers are required to give you not only 30-day notice before they increase their rates, but they have to also provide detail about why those rates are being increased and how much. And finally, you as a resident have the right to manage your own finances. And that means to determine if that you are going to appoint someone with a power of attorney or that you want to have full access and full control of your finances. Next slide. I want to just paint a picture before I turn it over to Rachel, to my colleague in the Office of Legal Services. what we're looking at in California. While the AAAs, many of them oversee the work of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, you'll have a better understanding of just how broad and how, quite frankly, busy long-term care ombudsmen are in the community. Next slide. In California, we have 1,206 skilled nursing facilities that are licensed, 7,469 RCFEs, which include assisted living, and combined almost 8,000 facilities. That includes not just the complaints, but doing routine visits. Combined about 300,000, a little over 300,000 licensed beds. Next slide. And with regard to complaints, the top complaints, next slide. In 2022, consistently, I'd say the last 5 years, physical abuse has been the top complaint. Last year, we received 4,828 complaints and we investigated and closed them. And we also have a high number of gross neglect, as well as any illegal or inappropriate transfer, discharge, or evictions. And then I would add the care symptoms unattended. Those are important to note. What that means is if somebody is in need of wound care, if somebody is in need of going to the restroom, these are these are simple care requirements. And if they're being unattended, you have the right, and individuals do have the right and should complain if they're not being assisted in a timely manner, cleaned after they soiled their clothes, a number of situations that we run into. Next slide. And we wanted to share that the majority of the complaints currently still come from nursing homes and intermediate care facilities, although 34% last year did come from the RCFEs and residential care communities. Next slide. But what I think is really important about this one particular data point is that one would automatically assume that families and residents are the ones complaining. But in 2022, we had 8,000 of the 40,000 complaints come from facility staff. What that tells us is facility staff, they may be understaffed, they are seeing things, and they are reporting, and these are anonymous reports, but they are reporting conditions and situations that the ombudsman will investigate and then either cross-report to licensing or law enforcement, or be able to resolve by working with staff. Next slide. What I want to leave everyone with on this is that not one program under the Older Americans Act can address all of the needs of older Americans in our state on our own. We need to collaborate, we need to coordinate our efforts, and we need to be communicating consistently and regularly. This webinar is one example of how we can communicate, understanding the role and responsibilities of each of the parties that are part of a team, whether it's the team that is working on elder abuse case or an investigation in a facility, or whether you're serving a resident in the community, transitioning from skilled nursing to maybe out in the community. This is just a partial list of the type of federal, state, and local partners that we work with. And when we say collaborate, at the state level, we develop memorandums of understanding. And it's not that these are contracts that require any funding, but they are contracts that establish roles, responsibilities, and any sort of expectations that you would want from your respective partners. We also try to do these MOUs to remove any barriers and to find any best practices and to help us when we do systems advocacy. And lastly, communicating. It's so important, and we've noticed this even through our own experience at the State Department. When we reach out, for example, we've recently established an MOU with the Division of Medi-Cal Fraud and Elder Abuse under the California State Office of the Attorney General. And just having initial conversations to understand how they're organized, how they process complaints, how regionally they're set up, and now how they've centralized the complaint process, which will be establishing, they've established a hub of attorneys in the state office that will essentially look at the complaints and then determine where they have the resources to investigate that complaint. Also with resident-centered and resident-informed, when we say communication, the role of the ombudsman is to remind everyone we need to ask the resident or the resident's representative, if that's the situation, what do they want? What does success look like? What does a positive outcome look like? Next slide. And so I'd like to turn it now over to my colleague in the Office of Legal Services. We have the benefit, really, to be part of the California Department of Aging while we're an independent entity within the Department of Aging. Daniel Williams is our legal services developer, and he's an attorney, and I'm now going to turn it over to him because we could not do the work we do without Office of Legal Services. Daniel?
Thank you, Blanca. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to briefly introduce myself for those of you who were unable to attend our last two webinars. My name is Daniel Williams, and I've been an attorney with CDA and CDA's Legal Services Developer since July of 2022. I initially began studying law knowing that I wanted to focus extensively on public service work, and I started out my legal career in fair housing law. I then transitioned to state work last year when I started my current position with CDA. In connection with the objective of this webinar series to ensure and enhance support for 3B legal services and promote communication among all parts of the senior legal services community, I wanted to make sure that you all had a channel through which to reach me at any time. My email address was provided on the previous slide, and these slides will be emailed out to all attendees. So please don't hesitate to contact me for any reason with any questions or concerns related to 3B legal services. Thank you again so much for attending today's webinar. And with that, I will hand it back over to Ranjana.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Blanca. With that, we will go ahead and have a break. If everyone can come back at 10 a.m. To go over the rest of the webinar, that would be great. So please take a short break. Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Welcome back. So now, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice little break. And now it's with my pleasure to introduce one of the longstanding, very experienced and a tremendous partner in the Long-Term Care Ombudsman program, Rachel Tate with Wise and Healthy Aging. And as I mentioned earlier, she is the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program Vice President in LA County. So Rachel, take it away.
Good morning, thank you. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the evolution of some of our multidisciplinary teams here in Los Angeles County and how our agency Wise and Healthy Aging has been a part of them. We had initially our fiduciary abuse specialist team, aka our FAST team, which was about a little more than 15 years ago. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then in Los Angeles County, that sort of morphed into our forensic center, which has taken on some new life recently as part of our Center for Excellence, which is also housed at Wise and Healthy Aging. And then unique to the city of Pasadena is our Pasadena Elderly Independent Adult Liaison Team, our PEDAL team, which Tim Wellman will speak a little bit more about specifically. Next slide. So our FAST team was a really unique partnership focusing on financial abuse cases. Financial abuse cases can be extremely complex and have a lot of moving parts and a lot of details. So this was a multidisciplinary team that brought together representatives from law enforcement, adult protective services, the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, but also brought in both civil and criminal attorneys, the public guardian office, the probate investigators, and then individuals from different private entities. So fraud investigators with financial institutions, insurance investigators, and different folks, because once you start digging into a financial abuse case, there are so many layers and pieces of it that it's best to work together so that everyone is able to sort of share their expertise in handling these cases for our older adults. We also were able to do things like joint visits where the Ombudsman and Adult Protective Services were able to visit together, because it could be as a result of the person's financial abuse, they ended up in a facility, or they were in a facility and as a result of someone financially abusing them in the community, their bills at the facility were not being paid, and therefore they were at risk for eviction and ultimately homelessness at one of the most vulnerable times in their life. So this team met in sort of a variety of formats, and one of the key elements that I think made this team unique was while they did their case presentations and different law enforcement agencies or adult protective services or the Ombudsman could present a case they were working on and seek assistance of the team, they also routinely and regularly held training components so that everyone in the room could benefit and learn from the expertise of the others in the room. So you had trainings from all of the represented agencies, or you had trainings on new and upcoming scams, because as you all know, those are morphing and changing constantly. So there is the need for constant ongoing education to try to stem the tide of how many of these cases we're dealing with. This collaboration of all of these agencies actually resulted in receiving or consulting on some of the most egregious financial abuse cases in the city and county of Los Angeles. And it was really amazing to see how many professionals from how many different organizations and agencies would come together for the specific purpose of sort of assisting older adults in their legal matters and things that came up as a result of this. Next slide. So one case example that was presented at our FAST team and multiple agencies worked on was an older adult couple who were moved from their home to an assisted living facility. Staff in the assisted living facility had actually befriended this couple, encouraged them to move to the facility. Once they were in the facility, staff in the facility became their power of attorney, moved them into the facility, and then started selling things out of their private home without their knowledge or consent. The facility staff then also became the representative payee for the client Social Security funds. I think at that point, they were trying to access pension and other funds, which were a little harder for them to get their hands on. The clients could not physically get back to their own home without the assistance of the facility staff, whom they had become completely dependent on, and they were the ones that in fact removed them from the home. So they weren't able to get back and see what of their property was remaining, what of their items were still there, what heirlooms were still existing or had been sold off, that type of thing. And in this case, law enforcement was involved. The district attorney was involved, the city attorney was involved, APS was involved, the Long-Term Care Ombudsman was involved. There was some question about capacity of the individuals. So the probate investigators opened a case and began their investigation. We made a number of joint visits with the Ombudsman Program and Adult Protective Services. And at one point, we're able to coordinate a visit back to their home so that they could actually take in what was still there or what was not there. And it was an extremely troubling case because everything was done in the guise or in the vein of these individuals were being helped. These were professionals, right? Facility staff were professionals that were assisting them, were helping them. And all of it was done to slowly sort of erode all of their financial assets. Another key component to this one, I think I was missed to share, was that we also worked with the Social Security Administration's OIG, because once this facility became the representative payee for the client Social Security funds, Social Security Administration's OIG can look and see how many the facility has become payee for. And sometimes the amount of that can be an indicator or a red flag for some of the other agencies on problematic behaviors or warning signs of activities that should be considered a red flag for other agencies. Next slide. So some of the lessons we learned as the host agency for the FAST team was the focus. There really needs to be a needs assessment, which will help identify what types of specific cases individuals or a particular group is attempting to work on. Oftentimes, this can be a needs assessment based on situations within the community and where the agencies standing alone don't necessarily have the bandwidth or the ability to handle the complete breadth and width of all of those cases, but coming together and everyone contributing can assist. But it's really important to have some focus or some guiding principles about what types of cases are going to be worked on. That's not to say that when you end up with a multidisciplinary team that you won't at times have some of those unique components where here's this one-off case and there's really no one else to handle it. So this team is going to take a look and see what we can do. But having an idea and an understanding of what each team member can bring to that table to assist with. Another really important component of the multidisciplinary team structure that we found is memorandums of understanding or working agreements. It's really important for team members to understand what other team members can do and where their limitations are. Confidentiality related to certain things, or which agencies such as the Long-Term Care Ombudsman can enter facilities, right? So we have that ability and we bring that to the table. There's different components, and it's really important by having that memorandum of understanding, everyone is clear about which part each team member will bring. And then confidentiality agreements are critical, as you can all imagine. you're dealing with some very detailed and concerning elements of people's lives. Sometimes they will be criminal cases, sometimes they will be civil cases, sometimes they will be both. And it's really important to maintain the information and to protect the individual's confidentiality as much as possible. We've also found that it's very important to clearly identify which agency is sort of the record-keeping gatekeeper for that team. Which agency is going to be maintaining the records, documentation, etc. And then funding. Multidisciplinary teams are a brilliant way to sort of bring together resources and support from others, but at times, each agency that's giving time is giving time out of their own budget or out of their own ability, and that can put some limitations. So sometimes support from partner agencies, whether each team member is putting up a certain amount, or if there are grants or contract funds that are received from others, that can be really important. Next slide. So some of the benefits to multidisciplinary teamwork is that these systems that we're maneuvering and that we're expecting older adults to maneuver can be extremely difficult even for some of us that have been in the arena in the field for many years. And as Blanca spoke about, if you're in a long-term care facility and someone is not letting you access your mail or not access your phone or not access a lifeline to the outside world, it can be even more difficult to sort of maneuver these systems. So as team members, you kind of cut through some of the red tape because you're able to work together. I have this resident in a SNF. This is the barrier they are facing. This is why they can't accomplish this element. And other members of the team may be able to assist in getting through some of that red tape to assist that individual. It's also a really great foundation for cross-training and understanding between partner agencies. I cannot stress enough that you want to know what other agencies can do before the need emerges. And Mr. Wellman will talk a little bit about some of the things we've had happen here in Pasadena, but that included the evacuation of a nursing home. And you want to know what every person on that team can bring to the table and can do to assist in that situation before we're all standing out in the middle of the street at 3 a.m. trying to get it done. It's really important that we all know where everybody's specialty is, where their expertise is. I'm not going to try to do for another team member what they do better, and vice versa. Whenever you're dealing with, whether it's financial abuse cases, physical abuse cases, any type of abuse cases, the issues are complex and they often require multiple agencies. You need not only the criminal or civil prosecution parts of it, but also the victim services and what do we do to support this individual and make them whole or prevent them from being homeless or any of those other elements. So the partnerships really provide an opportunity to give a more holistic, person-centered approach to problem resolution. It's really ultimately about what is best for the older adult that we're working with. And more, I think teams are working extensively on asking, what is the client's goal in this process, or what does the client want? Because at times what the client wants is actually very different than what the professionals sitting at that table think is best. But it's really important to clearly understand what the older adult is seeking in their resolution of this problem. So some of the benefits of these teams have sort of morphed and evolved over time here in Los Angeles County. The financial abuse team sort of led way to the forensic center, and the forensic center was hearing all types of cases, more than just financial abuse cases, and the decision was made to sort of consolidate it into one team. Ultimately, just recently, the forensic center has now fallen under the umbrella of the Center of Excellence, which is housed here at Wise and Healthy Aging, and is a collaboration with Adult Protective Services, the Ombudsman, and again, numerous professionals to look at all types of cases, but also to include training and education to folks such as APS social workers, Long-Term Care Ombudsman, city attorneys and district attorneys that may not understand the nuances of some of the older adult cases, or the nuances of the difference between a residential care facility and a skilled nursing facility, and what's allowed at a nursing facility that's not allowed at a care at an assisted living facility, and things like that. So I think with the lessons we've learned over time, we continue to evolve into stronger and more established partnerships to benefit older adults. With that said, I will introduce Tim Wellman, our Chief Assistant City Prosecutor here in the city of Pasadena, to talk a little bit about the PEDAL team and what we're doing there.
All right. Great. Thank you, Rachel. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Looks like I'm on the correct slide, so that's a good start. So my name is Tim Wellman. I'm the Chief Assistant City Prosecutor for the city of Pasadena. I've had this position since the beginning of January. Before that, I was an Assistant City Prosecutor here in Pasadena since 2018. And before that, I was a prosecutor in Alameda County. It's up in Oakland for 20 years. So that's my background. In terms of what our division does, the prosecution division for the city attorney's office in Pasadena handles all misdemeanor cases in Pasadena, from review and filing that we'll get from a law enforcement entity, normally the Pasadena Police Department, to charging, to arraignment, to pretrial, and if there's no resolution, I can go all the way to jury trial, and if there's a conviction, to appeal. Misdemeanor cases include domestic violence, DUI, petty theft, drug possession, trespassing, vehicular manslaughter, and wobblers that are not prosecuted as felonies by the DA's office. So here's the legal lesson for the day. Wobblers is a term that's used for those types of offenses that can be charged as a felony or as a misdemeanor. Those can include vehicle theft, identity theft, grand theft, certain types of vandalism, burglary, and so forth. And elder abuse is a wobbler, and we will handle those cases when not filed as a felony. So in many counties in California, the district attorney's office will handle all of the felony cases and all of the misdemeanor cases. And that was my experience in Alameda County up until when I left in 2018. But in Los Angeles County, there are certain cities, I believe there's 10 of them, that have their own city attorney's office that prosecutes their misdemeanors. And Pasadena is one of those. And we also handle our municipal code violations. One of my duties as chief assistant is to represent the city attorney's office on the PEDAL team. So next slide. So PEDAL stands for the Pasadena Elderly Dependent Adult Liaison Team. It's a multidisciplinary working group that involves representatives from a variety of city departments as well as outside entities. So we've got the city manager's office, the city attorney's office, planning and community development. They do code enforcement. We've got the Pasadena Health Department. I believe Pasadena is one of 4 cities in California to operate its own health department. We have the police department. We have the fire department. We have the Wise and Healthy Aging Long-Term Care Ombudsman's office. Rachel, that's a mouthful. That's a long title. We have Huntington Hospital. We have USC Keck School of Medicine. I think I've got them all. So the mission, as you can see from there, is to improve the quality of life for elders and dependent adults residing in long-term care facilities through education, community outreach, code enforcement, and if necessary, prosecution. Next slide. So Pasadena has more than 3,000 residents and over 100 skilled nursing and long-term care facilities. And PEDAL has worked to improve the quality of life for those elders and dependent adults, to raise awareness of healthcare matters, to resolve issues important to facility residents, to conduct community outreach, to ensure code enforcement and compliance, and if necessary, prosecute violations. And the idea is having people on this working group who have different backgrounds and skills that together the team can work through some of the issues that confront the residents in these facilities in Pasadena. And so, for example, it's great to have someone from the health department because they can go through the differences and the importance of a N95 mask versus a K95 mask. That's way above my head. See, I can't do anything there. But if someone has a question about law, hopefully I can muddle through it and answer the question. I do know that there's concern that there's a high percentage of facilities that have demonstrated deficiencies, and PEDAL tries to bring education, awareness, training to that. And this was before my time in my current position that COVID-19 magnified some of those deficiencies. So Rachel, if you want to talk about the next portion of that slide, since I think you were the expert at the time dealing with that.
So we did have 2 evacuations during the COVID-19 pandemic, one specifically related to COVID and the lack of care that was received at one of the facilities. So obviously the state stepped in and did what they could to provide National Guard support and other things that were in place at the time. But ultimately the decision was made that it was just too far gone and it was not in the best interest of the residents in that facility to keep them there. So this was a collaboration. Ultimately the removal of the residents from this location was spearheaded by the Pasadena Fire Department in conjunction with the Pasadena Public Health Department, the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, police were out there as well. And the decision was made that it was in the best interest, which is never an easy decision, to move people, especially late at night with very limited notification. But ultimately the situation was that dire and it was that necessary. But because this team had knowledge of one another, we weren't officially PEDAL at the time, but we had still been working pretty well together and in collaboration. And it was this night that probably made us all say, now's the time to actually officially form our team. Those residents were given the best care that could happen in that moment. So every effort was made to keep their property with them. Every effort was made to notify their families. We kept them together as much as possible to find safe and healthy placements for them. And then in our second relocation effort, that was actually a Pasadena Public Health staff member that was driving home and realized that there was massive construction at a nursing home that none of us had been notified about. And because of their education with PEDAL and all of our collaborations, they knew to immediately pull over and start calling other team members to say, what is going on here? And when we got out there that night, we realized that they had done such a drastic extreme roof repairs that there was no air conditioning in the building during one of the hottest heat waves we had in Pasadena that summer. So ultimately the decision was made that those individuals needed to be relocated immediately in order to preserve life and safety.
Thank you. Next slide. So part of the things that PEDAL has focused on has included education to our community members, facility staff. I believe there was a training, a symposium that was done for facilities directors and managers. There's training for law enforcement. Circle back to this in a second with 2 types of offenses that are sometimes raised or discussed. Site visits, certainly the Pasadena Health Department has regular site visits, but there was also a working group or a subgroup of our PEDAL team that visited a particular facility just to address some concerns. And that included, I believe, Rachel as well as the fire department. Systems advocacy for any legislative comments. I know PEDAL had drafted a letter for the mayor to sign in support of some particular legislation, and meetings with regulatory agencies. I know there was invited on a doctor involved with the HFID, which is in Los Angeles County. HFID stands for the Health Facility Inspection Division, and it's contracted by the State Department of Public Health Licensing and Certification, responsible for licensing, certification, and certain enforcement things. Let me go back to law enforcement. There are certain types of conduct and issues that can rise to or constitute a crime. So we sometimes hear this with elder abuse. And there are a number of elements to be able to prove elder abuse, and to prove a crime, you've got to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And so we'll go through a couple of those elements. Firstly, the defendant, the person who would be charged with the crime, while having care or custody of the victim, willfully caused or permitted a victim's person or health to be impaired, or to be placed in a situation where his or her person or health was endangered. The defendant must be the person inflicting the suffering on the victim, or causing or permitting the victim to suffer or to be injured or endangered under circumstances likely to produce great bodily injury or death. Victim must be an elder or dependent adult, and the defendant knew or should have known the victim was an elder or dependent adult. There's a few more elements, but you can see there's a lot of different elements and things that have to be proved to be able to prosecute someone or a facility for elder abuse. And I'll give you an example. If a nurse hits an elderly resident and does so intentionally and causes injury, well, that's easy, right? That's a crime. But what happens when, say, an employee transports a resident to an appointment, and when that employee returns, they leave the resident in the car with the windows up and it's 90 degrees outside? And does it matter whether the person's left in the car for 30 seconds or an hour? Probably, because it's more likely to have great bodily injury or death the longer that the resident's left in the car. And does it matter if it's intentional or an accident? Well, for criminal prosecution, it absolutely does require willfulness, which means it was intentional or on purpose. If it's an accident, it's not a crime. But if there's a pattern of accidents, you may be able to argue that it's really willful conduct. And we actually had a facility in Pasadena where a resident was left in a car. It wasn't 90 degrees. It was longer than an hour, if I remember correctly. It was an accident. Police later came out and did a report. It was an accident, and the resident was taken to a hospital just for observation, was okay, but understandably, the resident's family was upset about what happened. Another offense that we sometimes see used or described when there's issues at a facility is nuisance. And to prove that, you've got to establish the defendant, might be the facility owner or manager, willfully maintained or committed an act of public nuisance. So what's an act of public nuisance? It's defined as anything injurious to the health, or is indecent or offensive to the senses, or an obstruction to the free use of property, and interferes with the comfortable enjoyment of life or property, or an entire community or neighborhood, or a considerable number of persons. You can tell these things are written by lawyers because there's some legalese in there. But it's a fairly broad statute. So let me give you an example. This is not from a skilled nursing facility or a long-term care facility, but it is an example in Pasadena where we had an owner who owns a 2-story building, and on the first floor there's some restaurants and food facilities. On the second floor there's offices, and there was a rat infestation on the second floor. So the building owner obviously didn't want the rats to be there. The owner didn't ask the rats to come, but once aware of the situation, the property owner has a responsibility to abate or take care of the rats. And if it's done quickly and effectively, it certainly wouldn't rise to a crime. But if the person is dealing with it very slowly, ineffectively, and is allowing the problem to continue, you can see at a certain point it could evolve into a public nuisance, because it's a situation that's being willfully maintained by not eradicating it. And so we've seen situations with some of the long-term care facilities in Pasadena where there's some things going on in the facilities, and there will be questions, well, does this rise to a nuisance? And so these are some of the legal issues that get dealt with. If we do believe that there was a crime, we usually need, before our office can review and file something, we need a police report, or at least a report from an agency that gives us enough information to be able to determine we can prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, there's other facilities or agencies involved. We talked about the HFID. And so if our health department finds issues and they go to HFID and they don't do anything, then there's always a possibility that it could come to Pasadena as our city attorney's office to take its own enforcement action. Or it may be that there are other entities involved. I do know, getting back to our slide here, in terms of some of the education, PEDAL does have a website. It's connected to the City of Pasadena website that lists the enforcement agencies there. We've had people talk to the Pasadena Senior Center for Education to community members. And I know we've done a few other things. I don't know, Rachel, is there anything you want to add on this slide? I'm sure I'm missing all the important stuff.
We've also been able to do some YouTube videos for things like World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. We're working on some others in our upcoming queue to provide education to the community about what you need to know about long-term care before you get there, what you need to know if your loved one ends up there, what you need to know if you end up there. So we have a lot that we're working on, and it's sort of an evolving process as to what we identify as current community needs. And it's a really dynamic team that's able to shift and make awareness, in response to what we're seeing. One of our things this last year, and as many of you probably know, the city of Pasadena hosts millions of people every holiday season for the Rose Parade, Rose Bowl. And just in time for that, we also had elder abuse awareness campaigns put up on all of the bus benches and on our public transportation, and where to call if you have help, if anyone's stealing your funds, if any of those types of things. So it was a really innovative approach from this team, and had a really wide-reaching audience because of that.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, next slide. And I think this is where we turn it over to Rajana to take a poll.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Rachel. Now it's time to hear from our participants, and we'd like to make the webinars interactive. And it's a great way to get a sense of your perspective and insight. We will be launching 2 poll questions, and you'll see it appear on your screen. You can simply click on your chosen response and your input will be recorded. So let's get things kicked off with the first question. Next slide, please. I'll go ahead and read the first question. What has your organization done to modernize your LTC program? We have a few questions, few answers coming through. We'll take a few more moments to get everyone's input. So it seems like organizations are leaning towards a person-centered care model, prioritizing an individual's care and needs. And then the second feedback that we're getting is creating integrated technology for telehealth and remote services, which is really important because of the pandemic. And coming in at third, we have all of the above. So organizations are incorporating integrated technology, a person-centered care model, utilizing data analytics and research, and trying to get innovative funding models and exploring the different various grant funding opportunities that are available to organizations. So this is great. Thank you so much for your feedback, and we will be launching our second poll shortly. Rosie, are you able to go into the second poll question? Thank you. And poll 2, what type of services are you implementing under elder abuse prevention? I'll give everyone a few moments to answer this question. What type of services are you implementing under the elder abuse prevention? I'll give everyone a few moments to answer. Thank you for everyone who's interacting. We have 18 answers going up to 21, and it seems like the highest one that we have is increasing public awareness campaigns, outreach. Anyone else want to provide their feedback? And coming up second, we have collaborating with multidisciplinary teams, which I'm sure Rachel and Tim are excited to hear. And working with the Long-Term Care Ombudsman team. Wonderful. I mean, it's really important for us to, as Blanca and Rachel and Tim mentioned, to collaborate and provide communication for this, for our older adults and adults with disabilities population. Can't emphasize that enough. So I'm going to go ahead and share the results if everyone can see it. So we're at 53% public awareness and outreach. Stop sharing. So thank you for everyone for participating in our polls, and I will turn it over back to Blanca to open up for our Q&A session. Blanca?
Oh, I just really appreciate that poll. And interesting to note that person-centered models are pretty common, and that's really great to know that. So I'm going to open it up for questions and answers, and this is to be an interactive webinar. I'd like Tim and Rachel to also join me in this portion of the Q&A, and we're just going to look at, first of all, we have one question from Randy. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Dinning. Can a facility have something in the admissions agreement that gives them some leeway for repairs and pest abatement that relieves them of the nuisance complaint? So an owner might take the position, we covered this in the admissions agreement that the residents signed. So to my knowledge, there isn't anything in the admissions agreement that should give them leeway or a pass. But I would like to also turn it over to Tim or Rachel.
I guess I'll start. So could they at admission say, by the way, we are rat friendly and we're built on top of rat nest and we allow rats to run freely through our facility. You're on notice. Please don't complain about this. They are soon going to become your friends. No, I don't think they could. And in fact, I think Rachel knows this better than me. They're actually responsible for maintaining a pest-free facility. That doesn't mean that something could come up that they're not, they're not expecting, they're not planning on. But as soon as something like that comes up, they need to take care of it, and they can't. They won't be able to get out of that responsibility by saying, you're living with a den of rats.
So I think one of the things that's important, like Tim mentioned and Blanca mentioned, that so things do happen, right? So maybe there's construction in the building next door and somehow that causes an influx of roaches or rats or something like that. So I think it becomes a question of when did they become aware and did they promptly act to resolve the problem? But they cannot and should not have admissions agreements that cause you to sign away your rights at the time of admission, because you do not surrender any of your civil rights by entering a long-term care facility. So I'm entering a facility, I now have to live with a rat as a roommate is not an appropriate response.
We have a question. Thank you very much, Rachel and Tim. We have a question from Alea Ramos, who's a long-term care ombudsman program analyst. Alea. Alea, you'll have to go off mute. Okay, I'm not hearing her. So I don't know if you need to take her off mute.
I think she is muted. She has the ability to ask her question. We could come back to her. Does anyone?
Okay. Yes, so Benson Nadell has a good question, and I think this is really for, well, first of all, the Office of Legal Services does provide state and the local programs with excellent counsel whenever we are dealing with cases, investigations, when we've been subpoenaed for our records. And Benson Nadell, do you want to ask your question live, please, and go off mute?
Hey, Benson, if you can please remove your.
Okay. If an ombudsman in a local program is part of a elder abuse case, like say physical or financial, which does go to prosecution, and that ombudsman is asked to appear under cross-examination for that prosecution of that case, I'm actually asking Rachel for her experience in that, rather than speculate on what that process might be, because I'm sure it's happened in LA, it's happened in San Francisco a few decades ago, but not recently. So that's why I'm asking the question.
So I don't know that I've testified on anything Pasadena specific. As you know, Benson, I've been here more years than I care to admit to at this point. So I don't know that I've testified on anything Pasadena specific. However, myself and members of my team have testified on cases, sometimes at the request of the regulatory agency or others that are trying to seek license revocation, temporary orders, things like that. Or we've also been subpoenaed in both criminal and civil cases, grand jury cases, any number of things as we actively seek justice for our long-term care residents. So yes, we have testified.
And if you have a question, if you go ahead and raise your hand, and we'd like this, as I said, to be interactive. A question or a comment that you want to share with the panel. If not, I do have a question I would like to pose to both Rachel and Tim. What have you found or quite frankly, how often do you meet in PEDAL as the multidisciplinary team, and what are you finding? Are there any particular trends that you have seen in your work that may merit systems advocacy at the state level?
I'll start with the first part. That's the easier part of the question. So PEDAL meets virtually, I believe it's Teams, and it's every Thursday at 9 a.m. And the goal is to have the meeting last only an hour. Occasionally we'll, like I think last year for Thanksgiving, they gave us Thanksgiving off, so we didn't have to meet on Thanksgiving. So that was nice. There's a few Thursdays where we don't meet, but it's generally every week. And there are going to be sometimes, because people are on vacation or have other commitments, that not everyone on the team can meet. But we usually get a good enough group and mixture of people with talents and skills that whatever the agenda items are, we're able to get through them.
Thank you, Tim.
I think
Yeah, Rachel.
For the trends, it sort of evolves over time, and that's one of the things of having a team that meets regularly and is in pretty consistent communication. So we really started meeting at a greater height of COVID, and so we were able to identify infection control practices and things that were problematic. And here in the city of Pasadena, they're a little unique in that they have their own public health department. So we were able to have a public health nurse go out with a long-term care ombudsman and at times strategize, here is the public health need, here is where we're coming up against a resident's right need, right? This resident needs connection, this resident needs activity, this resident needs those components. So we were able to strategize as a team. Pasadena Public Health was one of the first to reach out to us at the very start of the pandemic and get our insight, the Ombudsman Program insight, and publish a list of COVID-friendly activities and ways to keep residents engaged because they understood the absolute importance of that. They've gotten creative in how to build red zones when we were doing zones and how do we get around keeping people safe. So that's been one of the trends. But I think what is a little unique to the team, and we're just starting to see it as the team goes on, one of the trends is that if you address something in one facility, they talk, and then the other facilities address it without us having to do the site visit and without us having to put the pressure. So they're hearing about it from others. We were also able to hold a summit event where we brought in all SNF staff from the whole community and provide education on topics that were relevant to what they were doing and provide CEUs and things to make it worthwhile to come into that room. And start a dialogue and start a communication. So when you see the ombudsman, if you have a question, ask it. If you see the public health nurse, ask it. If you see fire, ask them. We want to be, these are members of our community, like Blanca said, and we all want to be a part of making this a safe and comfortable community.
Thank you, Rachel. And Ranjana, you said you have a question, and then I'll go over to another question posed by Benson. Ranjana?
Thank you, Blanca. Thank you, Rachel, for emphasizing the need to ask questions, because if you don't ask your question and someone else has that same question, it's not going to be answered. And that one person with the question can alleviate, so much by just voicing and communicating that. So I do appreciate that emphasis. And my question is, how often do other providers reach out for information on PEDAL and FAST? I believe that this model is phenomenal, and it would help in rural areas as well. And are providers reaching out to get assistance on how they can establish a model similar to what you have?
I have actually had some inquiries, and I know that Keck School of Medicine, which also has members on the team, have also had some inquiries. We will be presenting on the model at the Consumer Voice Conference coming up this fall, because I do believe that it is the only team really of its kind in the country at the moment. And it is a really great, promising model that we're hoping will assist in some of these communities where you can pull together the resources. And I think one thing we all learned during COVID was you could pull together team members from all over via Teams or Zoom, and you don't have to necessarily all travel to be in the same space if travel is difficult. So I think I'm starting to get inquiries about how did it start, where do you host it, who do you, so I do think it's starting to sort of get some traction in that sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel.
And another follow-up question is from Benson again, is he's noticed in San Francisco, the mandated reports have dropped off during COVID from various skilled nursing facilities and smaller residential care facilities. So he wanted to ask if the Pasadena or the LA office does regular staff training about mandated reporting with an emphasis on resident rights in the ombudsman role.
We absolutely do. Our field ombudsmen conduct facility in-services. We push hard on residents' rights for Residents' Rights Month. We do it throughout the year, but that's a real drive, and we actually compete a little with our different regions on which ones get the most presentations in during that time. So we do a little bit of that, but we also do our mandated reporting training to facility staff. Sometimes at their request, sometimes at our request. We've identified a need in your facility and we'd like to support you and help you out. So we'd like to provide this in-service for you. But we don't stop there. And I think one of the things that's made us sort of unique and a little bit formidable here in Los Angeles County is we train our mandated reporters that may not necessarily have a taste of residents' rights otherwise. So we train our first responders, we train hospital staff, we train as many mandated reporters as we can find that are willing to have us, and even some that are reluctantly willing to have us, but we nag them until they let us come in and do a presentation. But I think it's important that first responders know the difference between an assisted living and a skilled nursing facility. So what should their reasonable expectations be when they walk in there? Are they speaking to nursing staff? You know, you might be surprised, because a lot of us here in this training today are sort of from this world, and we know it, right? But a lot of folks assume that assisted living and skilled nursing are all the same. So if I'm speaking to somebody, they must be a nurse or they must be clinically trained, and not necessarily. So we do a lot of sort of education about what to expect when entering these settings, what residents have the right to do in those settings, what residents have the reasonable expectation of being provided for them in those settings, because I think that is absolutely critical to giving them a voice.
I'm not seeing any hands raised right now. So I do want to just pose a question, and Rachel and Tim, don't want to put you on the spot, but I am going to put you on the spot. And that is, first of all, your experience and and the example has been outstanding here today on a promising and best practice. I agree. I think this is a national, this is something should be brought up at the national level. So one of the things I wanted to ask, at the state, we really are focusing on being data-driven, because when we're looking at how programs are performing, or how in this case, a model is serving the residents, what data are you collecting, if any, and how do you get around the shared or the confidentiality of that data? Because as many people know, when it comes to the ombudsman, we have very strict guidance at the federal level. So if you could answer those two questions, and then I'll be turning it over to Ranjana to make a brief announcement.
So we are actually working with Keck USC and researchers at Keck to identify the best data points and how that can reasonably be done. Because when you're utilizing a new model, you've got to see what you can do with what you've got. I think one of the unique components that we have is that when you have a police department and a fire department and an ombudsman program, like all on the same team, is they have their data points for how many times they're going to a facility, how many calls they're receiving, how many calls to service they're receiving. So one of the things fire will look at is how many times did they go to the facility? How many times did they transport an individual based on that call? So was that call necessary? Was it not necessary? And each team can sort of analyze their data and scrub as necessary for identifiers or things like that. For Pasadena Fire and Pasadena PD, they also have Tim that they can go to. So while he's part of the team, you also have sort of that outside gatekeeper if he needs to say this could be shared or this could not be shared. We have Blanca, right? With these are the data points we want to bring to the team. Can we, or what do we need to remove in order to share? But I think it is a sort of evolving pattern, and so we're looking at some of that. But I think one of the biggest ones has been calls to service. When you have facilities with wildly high calls to service, there's a problem there. There's something happening in that building.
When you say calls to service, what do you mean?
So we've identified, a facility in the city that has more 911 calls than any other location in the city. So then the question obviously is why? Why? So we need to break down as a team. Is it because these people are more medically fragile and therefore you would expect more 911 calls? Or is it that they feel their needs aren't being met, so they're calling 911? Is it that, something's happening in that building or not happening in that building that should be happening? One of the things we did in another city with community policing officers was a presentation for residents in the facility about when you should call the police and when you should call the ombudsman. Because sometimes if you have a little cognitive impairment or a little confusion or anything like that, you know, the police were getting calls that clearly we were the better handle, is what they will say, is what law enforcement will say. So we did a presentation and we introduced ourselves and we made sure that they had some education and understanding, because we tend to take for granted that people know when to call the police or people know when to call the ombudsman. A lot of residents can't say ombudsman, let alone know how to find one. So it's a lot of going in there and saying, this is who we are and this is what we can do and this is how we can help.
So we have 5 minutes left. I'm going to pose has the last question that Benson asked, which I think is an excellent question. Does LA County have a death review team? And if they do, what is the role of the ombudsman?
I'm assuming Tim wants me to take that one too. Yes, LA County does have an elder death review team. It is typically housed or hosted by our district attorney and medical examiner. The ombudsman program does participate in those meetings. And as some of you on this call, I suspect, are ombudsman, you may know that when you're dealing with elder death cases, it is not uncommon to hear the term, it was an attended death, it was a facility death. So therefore, there's no questions to be asked. But the reality is, we know that there is substandard care in some of our facilities that mean there are questions to be asked. And sometimes I think our role in there is just to pose some of those questions. But did you consider, when was the last time they were seen? What type of medical care were they receiving? Just because you were in a facility doesn't mean you were receiving appropriate care. So we are sometimes that voice of the resident, even beyond their time here on earth, to say, what did they get? What did they not get? What did they deserve and what were they not provided?
So in closing, with the last few minutes, I wanted to again thank the California Department of Aging for inviting the Office of Long-Term Care Ombudsman, Healthy Aging, and PEDAL to join this webinar. We hope it was informative. It has been recorded. And just wanted to leave you with this, and that is that residents are in long-term care facilities, but they are part of the community. The ombudsman is a community partner. And so we encourage you to invite the ombudsman to be a part of your multidisciplinary team. We have a very unique role and a level of expertise that is important, just as every other partner at that table. So I want to thank you again. I hope you're all safe, and wishing everyone in the Southern California area some reprieve from these very, very challenging weather times. Thank you.